I will mute.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we ready?
Yes.
All right. Well, good evening. And as the days grow shorter and the weather closes in, we welcome the color and motion of birds to bring beauty to our days. Tonight, photographer Peter Cavanagh of Lopez Island will share with us some of his unique flight photographs captured during his travels around the world. Photographs that will appear in his book, 100 Flying Birds, Photographing the Mechanics of Flight, which is being released on the 17th of this month. He'll share what went into getting these shots, the locations, and anecdotes about the birds and their behavior, and the beauty and complexity of their flight. Peter has been taking photographs since he was a boy of 5, inspired and guided by his mother, who was a photographer's darkroom assistant. Raised and educated in the United Kingdom, he studied the mechanics of human movement on Earth and during spaceflight at Penn State, the Cleveland Clinic, and the University of Washington. His interest in bird flight photography and flight mechanics developed naturally from his professional background, as well as insights into aerodynamics, which he gained upon completion of his instrument rating as a private pilot. He is a member of the North American Nature Photographers Association, and he guest curated the exhibit How Birds Fly at the Seattle Museum of Flight. Peter's images have been included 3 times in the top 100 bird photographs of the year by the Audubon Society. His book, 100 Birds in Flight, Photographing the Mechanics of Flight, will be available at the Kingfisher Bookstore in Coopville, as well as other bookstores and sellers. And he has some incredible pictures on his website, which you should check out. Please welcome Peter Cavanagh.
Thank you. I wanted to add, Kathy, that Peter has agreed to take questions during the talk. So please put them on chat and Sharon will relay them to him. And then if there's time at the end, he's also happy to take questions at the end.
Okay.
So Peter, take it over.
David and Kathy, thank you very much indeed. Zoom has really worked in our favor tonight in the sense that in this terrible weather, we're all sitting quite comfortably at home. And it's my great pleasure to be able to join you in your homes tonight to talk about some topics that are of interest to all of us just by self-selection here tonight. And that is birds, bird flight, and the whole process of finding birds and photographing birds. Do you all see me full screen? Is my everything working with my, good. Okay, so I'm going to go right ahead and share my screen with you and show you some slides. Kathy's already given half my talk tonight to tell you a little bit about the history, but I'm probably going to do it again. She said the book that I published with Firefly Books is coming out next week. I got to meet it in Bainbridge Island for the first time this weekend, where I gave a talk to the Library U at Bainbridge. And so that was an exciting moment for me. What I want to do tonight is I want to tell you a little bit about my background, illuminate some of the things that Kathy said, tell you about my photographic journey, and from that, explain the evolution of the book. I'm going to read a few sections from the book and tell you some of the things I'm doing in the future, and then we'll take your questions, which can also happen as we go along. I probably will talk for 50 minutes or so, and leaving time for questions then. And of course, you won't be making a noise as you go out the door, because you simply will turn your screen off if you need to. So as Kathy mentioned, I did indeed grow up in England, and I had this Brownie 127 as an early camera here. And I also had a Kodak box camera with twin lens reflex, which I thought was a real Rolls Royce at the time. And I also had a darkroom in my home because, as Kathy mentioned, my mother was a darkroom assistant when she was young, and never lost the love of having a darkroom in the home, and having the smell of that pungent fixer and developer that you used to coax those black and white pictures so magically off the paper. I went to college in Loughborough in the United Kingdom, thought I would be a champion athlete. That didn't turn out to be so. I'm the skinny one at the top left here. And at that time, the camera that I had was probably one of the nicest cameras, not the most powerful. I'll tell you about that one later. But I did own at that time, and I still have that camera, a twin lens baby Raleigh, which was just a gorgeous camera. And I found the other day a slide that I submitted to a photo contest when I was 14 years old. It was a very ordinary picture of a swan, but it just was interesting to find it. And coincidentally, we were talking about swans earlier in the day. And I did graduate work in this amazing Victorian building, the Royal Free Hospital School of Medicine in the United Kingdom. And while I was there, and those not, by the way, the dates that I attended, those are the dates that the school was founded and then it closed. But I used photography to look at the mechanics of motion. And so photography has always been an integral part of both my professional life and my personal life. I then did indeed move to Penn State, and there's actually a plaque here that mentions me and a couple of other people at the lab that we founded there. And this makes me feel like I actually should be dead by now. You know, if you're on a plaque, that's usually sort of the end of times. But anyway, I still have a little life in me. But at Penn State, I used video analysis to do motion capture. And these were the early days of being able to automatically detect the movement of targets on a body during motion and automatically get them into a digital form. And this, of course, is the basis for animation as we know it today in commercial places. Now, my time at Penn State was also notable because that's where I first learned to fly. And I had my first airplane. This is a PA-28, Piper Cherokee. And when you study to become a private pilot, particularly an instrument-rated pilot, you end up studying a lot about aerodynamics. And I found the whole field of aerodynamics absolutely fascinating. Just how heavier than aircraft can fly, do fly, and why they fly. And so that knowledge gained during those times proved very fundamental, I should say instrumental as a pun, since it was an instrument rating, but instrumental in moving me towards applying those principles to bird flight. During that time, I had an Olympus IS-100 that you see here. This is not interchangeable lenses. This had a big zoom lens on it. You can still get something a bit like this. And I got my first sort of prosumer camera, a Canon 50D at that time, from which I did take a number of wildlife shots. But then I came to the University of Washington, and there is a special friend of mine on the Zoom today, and that is Rick Mattson. And I want to read a little bit from the acknowledgement section of my book. This will be news to Rick, of course, but it says, this photographic journey began when Rick Mattson, a bird photographer himself, invited me to join the Department of Orthopedics and Sports Medicine at the University of Washington in 2008. During time away from the lab, my eyes were soon opened to the rich ecosystems of the Pacific Northwest, and I began seeking out and photographing flying birds as a gateway into this new universe. So Rick, I haven't had a chance to thank you for stimulating me in this direction before, but I am doing so now. Now, I also got a decent lens when I arrived at the University of Washington. I got this 100-400 f4.5, 5.6 lens, and I started going up to Fur Island, which was mentioned in the chat earlier in the discussion. And I went up there with Paul Bannock, who has, you all know, has written wonderful books, most notably the Owl and the Woodpecker. And we went up to Fur Island, up to your northeast. And that was the day, February the 8th, 2009, when I first became interested in shooting flying birds. And really, I have not turned back since. And this is a photograph that I took. It's not a photograph I'd be particularly proud of today, but I took this picture of a short-eared owl on that day. And it was a pretty amazing day. There were all kinds of conflicts going on between harrier hawks and short-eared owls. And I remember Paul saying to me, don't think that it's always this good. And he was right. It's rarely been that good again, but it was an amazing day. And that's the day that really I set my compass and decided that photographing flying birds was for me. And pretty soon I got some better equipment. I got a Canon 1DX Mark I, and I got a 500 and a 600 millimeter lens actually. And when I got that equipment, I decided that, well, I have camera, we'll travel. And I started going to different places around the world in search of flying birds. And I'm going to take you on a little tour of a few of the places that I have been to in the last decade and show you a few photographs of the birds I've seen, and then explain to you how that all evolved into the present project of the book. So, of course, one starts at home, and one of the most beautiful birds, we don't have many pairs of them, but we do have ospreys on Lopez Island. And, you know, taking a picture of a bird landing is much more complicated than taking a picture of a bird taking off, because the simple reason you have no idea where that bird's going to land. And I don't generally go out walking around with my camera. I go to a specific location. I have a specific target in mind. And I was fortunate enough to have a friend who told me precisely the place where this osprey liked to perch before it went off fishing. And so a landing picture like this is a real prize. And I personally like landing pictures much better than I like takeoff pictures in general, because you get to see just the full extent of the beautiful wings. And as you know, an osprey is just all wings. It's actually a tiny bird body with massive wings. And you see them sort of clumsily flying out over the water before they make their wonderful dives, feet first, to take a fish. I was fortunate enough with that bird to know where its nest was. And this is a very interesting picture of a young osprey who is simply bored. He's picked up some fish debris from the bottom of the nest, and you see his sibling on the left. His parents are not bringing food in, and he simply, for the joy of flying, hovered above the nest. And you'll notice that the wing flap is simply forward. It's not down at all. And that's because he's only generating lift, doesn't need any thrust at all. So this was quite a remarkable opportunity to see a bird hovering just for the love of it, which was really quite remarkable. There is a wonderful bird cliff on the very western tip of Iceland, which was an early destination for me. It's called the Latruberg Bird Cliff. It's up to 450 feet tall. It is absolutely swirling with seabirds, kittiwakes, Atlantic puffins. And this picture of a puffin taking off was taken right from where you see the top of the cliff there, as the puffin made its thrust to take off. And as you well know, puffins and puffin wings are a compromise between wings for flying in the air and wings for flying in the water. And they're really not great flyers. When the puffin lands, it sounds like a large moth just arrived near your camera. And the puffins land, they nest on top of the cliff for two reasons. That's where they can dig a burrow, but it's also where they can take off and just thrust themselves off the cliff and start getting downward velocity so they can get wing air moving across their wings and get some lift. And as you know, the lift on a wing is proportional to the square of the velocity. So they get very rapidly, they get a lot of lift as they are falling down. And if you've seen a puffin try to take off from the water, you know, they're another of those birds that has a lot of trouble taking off from the water, and their compromised wings are a reason for that. On the island of Mull in Scotland, that's Tobermory you see there, a beautiful little village with colorful houses. The white-tailed eagle has been reintroduced. It's been absent from the British Isles for almost 150 years, mostly from hunting, trapping, poisoning, loss of habitat. And this bird came from Norway, and other birds have successfully established a colony in Scotland. And so seeing white-tailed eagles in the British Isles was just a huge thrill for me. I have also seen them in Norway and in Japan, and I'll show you a few of those a little later on. Going straight to Japan now, to the northern island of Hokkaido. In the winter, one can see these beautiful red-crowned Japanese cranes. They are revered in Japan. Many of the wedding kimonos, the cranes appear as a symbol of faithfulness because these birds are thought to mate for life. And they are superb flyers. And I had a wonderful time on a snowbound week in Hokkaido. They do not like to fly alone. They always like to be near the heartbeat of another bird. And this picture of three of them together is typical of as you see them flying. And on one of the days I was there was the most dramatic snowstorm. And this is a picture of a red-crowned crane just leaping into the air for no apparent reason. There was no mate he was trying to impress. There was no territory to guard. It was just some impulse in the middle of a blizzard that this bird thrust itself into the air. Now this is in South Africa, and this is one of my favorite birds. It's called the saddlebill stork. For reasons which are obvious, it's sometimes called the German flag bird because all of the colors of the German flag are in there. The yellow is in this wattle just on the forehead and in two tiny wattles, which you can't see in this case, in the male bird that are on the face. I had been to Africa about 3 times before I got a decent flying shot of this bird. And on this occasion, it was one of those moments when everything went right. The bird had been foraging in some wetland. I had time to put an extender on my lens, so I had about 1,000 millimeters of lens there. I was able to get my exposure on the bird before it took off. And I had a nice background, which we'll talk about a little more later. And I was able to get about 10 flight shots, of which this one is my favorite. Just an absolutely spectacular bird. On one of my previous occasions, I had staked out the nest of a saddlebill stork that you see here on the left, and that's about the only picture that I got for a full day's staking out of the nest. The bird was very sedentary on that day. Now, when you're in Africa, anytime you find a hornbill's nest, it's a photographic bonanza. And that's because the hornbills have this remarkable nesting behavior that I want to tell you a little bit about. This is a southern yellow-bill hornbill, but all of the hornbills do a similar kind of nesting behavior. And on the left here, you see a diagrammatic picture of what happens to the female hornbill as she prepares to lay eggs and look after her chicks. She and the male together find a cavity that they like. And this one here is his entrance to a cavity. in the tree. They then seal it with mud and with feces until there is just the tiniest little opening. The female then undergoes a synchronous molt of all her feathers. So there she is, sealed into a cavity, completely helpless, couldn't escape even if she decided to break out because she has no wing feathers. And she's completely dependent on the male for about 40 days, while he constantly brings a varied diet of fruits and insects and for her and for eventually the chicks. Studies have shown remarkably that the vast majority of these male hornbills they never desert their partner. They are faithful to feeding, for provisioning the nest. And so it's if you find the nest and you are able to set up outside, as we were here, every half an hour or so, or more frequently, the bird will be back with some different kind of treat for the female and the chicks. Now, this is another hornbill that can be found in South Africa. This is a beautiful hornbill called a trumpeter hornbill. And here you see, by the way, those are hippos in the background, that noise. So here he comes, and he's got some small fruits, and he's going to pop them into the cavity. Now, this bird, over the next 10 minutes, became like a gumball machine. He kept regurgitating these fruits and popping them in. And there's another one. And I'm not going to bore you with the 39 pieces of fruit that he regurgitated during this visit. But it was remarkable to watch this particular a vegetarian trip. And there were other non-vegetarian trips. Once he'd finished, he decided it was time to clean out the nest. And there we go. Just take away some of the debris and off he goes. So you can just imagine what a bonanza it is to find a nest like that and to be able to take video and stills of such attractive and beautiful birds. Now, this is another very interesting bird from South Africa. This is a southern masked weaver, and look at the beautiful nest that this bird has constructed. And the way mating works in these birds is that when he's finished the nest, he invites a female partner to take a look at it. And I don't know if they have a realtor bird or not, but somehow she finds it and she comes in, she goes in, she takes a look at a few other nests. And if she likes it, they make a home, and that's where their brood will be born. The obvious question when you look at this wonderful finished product is, how do they get started with the nest in the first place? And here you see one of the birds bringing in a couple of pieces of grass. And here you see, and here, the male working on the very early stages of his nest. And you can see that the way it started, not surprisingly, is just by making a single ring. And you see in this video the wonderful skill of this bird. He reminds you of sort of a quilter or somebody on a loom, just passing the thread of the material through and pulling it tight. And so having made one circle, he then builds the circle on both sides with decreasing radii of concentric circles. So a wonderfully industrious bird. Perhaps the most, the place where the assault on the senses, all the senses, for a bird lover is greatest is the area of the Southern Ocean, where you can go to the Falkland Islands, to South Georgia, and to Antarctica. And particularly on the trips that I have taken to South Georgia, I have really been overwhelmed by just the huge seething biomass that you find on the beaches of South Georgia. The landings are all wet landings, very exciting. You come out of a Zodiac and you go onto the beach and you see sights like this. This is a penguin colony on at Salisbury Plain on the island of South Georgia. And you see a segmentation of the parents and the chicks. The early whalers thought that these were different species of penguin because they look so different from the parents. But they're not, of course. And some of the penguin behaviors are quite remarkable. When the adults go on foraging trips for perhaps a day or 2 days, they leave all of the young behind in a sort of a creche, a kindergarten, and they leave a few adults in charge at the corners. It's incredibly organized social behavior. It makes you wonder, how they decide who's looking after the kids today. And can you trust those people to look after the kids? And you sometimes find a beach deserted from adults, but just with these youngsters. And that's with the rockhopper penguins too. They have the same kinds of behavior. I want to show you a video now of king penguins on South Georgia. And here comes the cavalry. As far as the eye can see, there's just a mass of king penguins. Very hesitant about going into the water, and then suddenly they go for it. Even more exciting when they're coming out. And of course, the great thing about being on places like South Georgia is that the animals have absolutely no concern about your presence. You can be as close to them as you want. They sometimes come and inspect you, take a look at your shoes, take a look at your camera. And they are completely uninhibited in their behaviors. Well, from South Georgia, it's just a very turbulent hop and a skip down to the Antarctic Peninsula. And these chin-scrap penguins so remind me of opera singers here that I thought perhaps a little snippet of my favorite aria from Così fan tutte came to mind when I saw them. It wasn't quite so beautiful the way they were singing, though, I have to say. Well, I could dwell on that all night, but I won't. From one of these trips, I went up into Chilean Patagonia to a place where I was told you would reliably find Andean condors. I'm sure all of you have had this experience. Someone tells you they're always there, you're definitely going to find them. And I actually waited for 3 days, and there wasn't a sign of a condor flying, roosting, didn't hear one. And then on the afternoon of my very last day, a group of condors came in, and these birds are absolutely phenomenal birds to watch and photograph. This photograph brings to mind the importance of the background against which you photograph a bird. When I first started taking birds, I would take a picture of the bird against the blue sky, and I'd come home and I'd show it to my wife, who was a painter, and I'd say, "Hey, look, nice bird here." And she'd say, "Oh, another blue sky picture?" And finally, I realized that, one really needs to see the bird against its habitat, if you can at all do that, because it adds such an extra dimension to the picture. And as a photographer, your goals sort of keep escalating. First of all, you want any picture of the bird you can get. Then you want a picture of two birds together. Then you want a picture of the birds feeding or with their young or against their habitat. You know, there's always a better picture you can get. But this particular picture of the Andean condor over its habitat in the Pampas was one that I really like. The Falkland Islands is another place where it's easy to see a lot of birds who really don't care for your presence, don't care about your presence, excuse me. And this is a rare bird, and I'll talk about rarity and conservation trends just towards the end of my talk. But this bird is a striated caracara that feeds around the fringes of the penguin colony. And you see him, he can't lift this penguin carcass, but he's towing it along the beach to a place where he can be safe from other food stealers on the beach. Very pretty bird. These are gentoo penguins that were coming ashore. This is this was actually my mother's favorite piece of music, the Fingal's Cave, Mendelssohn's Fingal's Cave, which kind of seemed appropriate. To be so close to such a mass of birds is truly just a thrilling experience. There's a small island owned by Brazil off the northeast corner of Brazil called Fernando de Noronha. And this was one of the islands that Darwin stopped at during his southward voyage to go eventually end up in the Galapagos, of course. And this is a magnificent frigate bird that I took. Unusual because it's on top of the bird. These are birds that usually patrol at high altitude, but I was on top of the cliff, able to look down on the swirling waters of the Atlantic as the tide was coming in. Peru is perhaps the ultimate birding destination, I think. They're so rich in species. The habitat is relatively well preserved in many places, and the birds are just incredible. This is a very unusual bird. It really looks like a dinosaur, doesn't it? And it has completely baffled the geneticists who've tried to find out where it came from. It is a genus of one. It has no other direct relatives, and it's a crazy bird that is very clumsy, falls off the tree all the while. Its young have claws on the hand wing, just at the junction between the hand wing and the primaries, that they climb up the trees with. But just a remarkable throwback to be able to see that. The Chuncho Clay Lick in Tambopata, Peru, is another phenomenal place. You get there early in the morning before the birds arrive, and then the macaws start coming in 2 by 2. These birds always fly in twos. And what you're seeing here is mostly red and green macaws, a few scarlet macaws here, the ones that have got a little yellow on. And what happens in the morning is that they send a bird down as a sentinel to see if it's going to be safe for them all to roost, because of course, not only do they come to get nutrients from the clay, but their predators also come because they know it's a time when the birds have their guard down, they have their backs to the sky. And so they are on hair trigger alert for the presence of any risk. And on this particular day, within 10 seconds of taking this photograph, a photograph I have in the book, is of them all leaving. And when they leave, they generally leave for the day. Also in Peru, this is perhaps the rarest bird that I'm going to show you today. This is a marvelous spatule tail, which lives in a very small thread of the Huembo Valley in Peru. This is a great example of the sexual selection that occurs, where there's no real functional reason for these long rackets that this bird has. In fact, they must be a tremendous aerodynamic handicap. It has to deal with them all the time when flying, and difficult flying through close terrain. But obviously they are effective signaling to the female bird of his health, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And this bird is in critical danger of disappearing, which I'll come back to in a little while. In Ecuador, I saw this bird, which is a remarkable bird because its bill is about as long as its body. It's a swordbill hummingbird, and it's a wonderful example of the co-evolution of a bird and its favorite food source. It feeds on these brugmasia flowers here. And of course, the swordbill totally owns the pollen and the nectar in these flowers because no other bird is able to reach them. So it's a very remarkable conjunction of flower and bird. We talked about the signals that the males can send to females about their health. And this, of course, is the famous blue-footed booby. And studies have shown that it really is true that the bluer the foot, the healthier the male bird. And so the female is correct when she's making her choice based on the blueness of her suitor's feet. And here he was being ignored and decided he could make himself twice as big for her once she's seen his feet, and surely she must want him. Costa Rica is another of my very favorite destinations, and this is one of my favorite birds, the keelbill toucan. It seems to me like a bill that an artist has just gone to town on. You know, sometimes you go to cities where they have a moose or a cow, that there's 30 of them and artists paint them for different businesses. I'm sure you've all seen that. And this to me is like one of those birds that an artist just put a dab of orange on and a little purple and some blue and some green, and just a phenomenal bird. And they are just a joy to watch. I should mention that any of the images you see or have seen that have this blue icon on, these are images that are in my book. And so here you see a keelbill with a piece of banana disappearing to a perch.
Peter?
Yes.
We had a question in the chat here.
Yes.
Carol Russo would like to know, do you usually use a tripod when you take these pictures, or do you rely? Okay.
My favorite, in fact, I'll tell you a little bit about that. Early on, for probably 8 years, I did not. And I handheld, I had a tripod, a very nice tripod and a Whidbey gimbal, but most of the time I handheld this rig. And it was to my great detriment. Hand holding 15 to 20 pounds above your head for long periods of time and moving it is definitely not good for the upper extremity anatomy. And so I'll show you my latest rig just at the end of the talk, but with my long lenses now, my 600, I never handhold it. I always have it on the tripod.
Thank you.
And I was fortunate enough to be able to go to an Audubon sanctuary on Green Island, which is not far from Brownsville in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's a place where roseate spoonbills breed and reddish egrets breed. And this is a picture from there. It's a lovely bird and also one of my favorite birds. Well, we're kind of homing in on the circle now. And this is a sandhill crane from another famous birding destination, the Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge in New Mexico. And this is another picture from the book, another good example of using your feet to get into a position where you don't just have the bird in the sky, where you can use some of the fall vegetation to complement the colors of the bird. Big Sur, California. I was fortunate to be there when there were dead whales on the beach, and there was a big cluster of California condors. These birds, as you know, are still endangered. They still are trapped each year to be detoxified for lead that they have ingested from carrion, from lead bullets. And despite legislation to try and bring plastic bullets into the fore, there's still plenty of lead around, and these birds ingest it. And finally, back home to Lopez. This is a bald eagle doing a very interesting maneuver, not far from my home, actually. This bird is doing what's called wingtip reversal. Notice that his primary feathers look like slats of a Venetian blind. And it's very interesting that these feathers are not under individual muscular control. They are all, the quills of these feathers are embedded in a membrane, which is a bit like the lever that you pull on a Venetian blind. And when you pull it, they all close or they all open. And so this bird is opening the primary feathers to be able to raise the wings quickly for a downstroke, a powerful downstroke. And that's what ornithologists call a wingtip reversal. Well, that's the end of our quick tour. And now let me tell you how all that flows into the book and what the book looks like. So why have I chosen flight? Well, I've chosen flight for the reasons I mentioned to you about my interest in flight aerodynamics, that mechanically it's much more interesting than sitting. But I also think that aesthetically, there is no contest between a flight shot and a perching shot. Let me show you a couple of examples, both from a trip I took just a month ago to Namibia. This is a tawny eagle perching on a branch. It's a nice bird, pretty bird. But that is also a tawny eagle. And I would submit that the excitement and the dynamism in a shot like this is so much greater to characterize what this bird is about. I sometimes say that I think flight is the essence of birdness. It's what birds are all about. It's why they have been so successful. It's why there are almost 10,000 species of birds that have survived millions of years. Birds fly for three reasons. They fly to escape predators. They fly to go to places where there is more attractive climate, and they fly for food. And in some places, birds have lost the ability to fly because they don't need any of those things. For example, the flightless cormorant in the Galapagos Islands, they have no predators, they have all the food they need in their back door, and the climate's perfect all year round. But for the rest of the birds, they need flight for those three reasons. And by their needing it, we benefit from the beauty of their bodies as they're in flight. Another example, this is a gorgeous bird, an endangered lappet-faced vulture, again from Namibia. But the contrast between photographing the bird sitting in the tree and photographing it flying, to me, no contest. The flight shot, hands down, is the winner. Well, the evolution of the book. So during the travels that I have described to you, I shot more than 500,000 photographs. I'm now up to 650,000 because, for reasons I'll tell you later, I'm shooting much faster and much more now. Every one of those images that I've taken has a story. And every bird that I've shot competes daily for survival. And every image has unique camera settings. And so I set out in this book to showcase the images, to tell the stories, while informing my readers about the flight mechanics, the photographic techniques, and the conservation status of the birds. And this is what the sort of template for the book is like. This is one story and one image from the book. The book is 100 double-page spreads. That's its core, where I introduce the species name, common name, scientific name, physical data about the bird, its length, its wingspan, its weight, male-female differences, its conservation status, its conservation trend, population trend, where the picture was taken, and what were the camera settings. And here is the story that I chose to tell about the particular bird. And I'll read you a few stories in a little while. So that's one story. And in each chapter, there are 9 stories. And so here, for example, is the chapter on gulls and terns. There are a total of 11 chapters. There's chapters on eagles, hummingbirds, gulls and terns, small water birds, large water birds, geese, ducks, and swans, raptors, condors, cranes, songbirds, and some of my favorites. There is an epilogue, of which I will read you a little. There are extensive footnotes. There's some further reading and an index, and all that totals up to 320 pages. So let me now turn to the book and read you just a few stories to give you the sort of flavor of the kind of things that I'm talking about. So this, you'll recognize that this is a black skimmer that in the previous photograph and in the book I had photographed in Galveston, Texas. And this one was photographed on the Cuiaba River in the Pantanal in Brazil in July. And so I say, arriving in a new part of the world and encountering a familiar bird is like an unexpected meeting with an old friend. Granted, this subspecies is slightly different from the Texas bird, but the unmistakable bill and the feeding behavior of this black skimmer welcomed me back to common ground. This image was taken at the end of a particularly rich and exciting day, starting in Porto Jofre, a small community at the southern end of the Transpantaneira Highway in Brazil's Pantanal. After photographing iconic toko toucans in the early morning, our day had included close-range sightings, a little too close actually, of jaguars, giant otters, and the world's largest living robot, the capybara. As the late afternoon sun turned the Cuiaba River into a strand of liquid gold, we guided our small boat into a calm eddy to end the day photographing skimmers feeding. The magical light seemed at first to be its own reward, but as I continued to shoot, adjusting my settings for the decreasing light, it soon became obvious that several of the birds were pushing the envelope too far and wiping out, cartwheeling, bill over tail, and crashing into the water. I don't know if these were young birds just learning the trade or experienced adults who felt that the benefits of deep exploration with their bills outweighed the risks. This encounter reminded me that we observe so much flawless flight behavior in birds that it comes as a real shock when they make a mistake and something goes radically wrong, as it did in this case. So that's the story of the black skimmer. This is a woodland kingfisher. The bird on the right is the bird that is on the front cover of the book. And I want to read you the story, and I actually want you to play, and I'm going to play the sound first. Let's listen to this bird's song. So I say about this picture that hearing the persistent melodious trill of the woodland kingfisher is a good way to fall in love with Africa. This bird is always there to give a morning wake-up call, to offer an invitation to an afternoon siesta, or to add a comment during an evening of reflection. You always hear it before you see it. So when the appearance of a blood-red bill is followed by a flash of turquoise and black wings, it's as if you just met somebody that you'd only heard on the radio. I associate this bird with the Sitara rest camp in the Kruger National Park, where I really first started listening to its song. Circular thatched huts known as rondavels are protected from the scorching sun by gangly shade trees that are the stages from which these kingfisher arias are sung. Curiously, this kingfisher doesn't do much fishing. It has a varied diet of flying and ground-dwelling insects, and sometimes it'll take frogs and lizards and a few small mammals, but fish and crustaceans are only rarely on the menu. This is obviously a bird with keen eyesight, as its typical hunting modus operandi is to perch on a tall branch, identify potential prey, and then swoop down for the kill, sometimes hovering briefly before it's to evaluate the target. The woodland kingfishers in this image were making short foraging flights to feed on ants or termites in a nearby dead trunk tree. And what I like about this late afternoon photograph is the striking colors of the birds are set against a hazy pastel background that reminds me of the sandy Letaba riverbank and its occasionally leafy brush. But having listened to the woodland kingfisher, as you just did, I find the image fails to capture what in my mind is the dominant feature of this bird, and that is its song. Well, perhaps one more. This is a bird you all know, a bird that's in your own backyards sometimes, and it's cedar waxwing. This was taken on Lopez Island in August, and here's my story about the cedar waxwing. The skeleton of a homesteader's fireplace guards the entrance to Fisherman Bay on Lopez Island, Washington, from behind the remnants of an old orchard. One small tree, a black mulberry, stands alone, embarrassed perhaps by its broken limbs and a peach fuzz of foliage clinging to the remaining branches. The tree's forlorn anatomy does, however, make an ideal setting for photographing the sublime cedar waxwing. I developed a close relationship with this tree during almost 15 hours of shooting over 5 days. As each session progressed, I moved in a circle around the tree to keep the sun at my back. Cedar waxwings are not very common in my neighborhood. These birds visited the tree about every 90 minutes on average, and they rarely stayed for more than a minute. I had to concentrate intensely not to miss such fleeting opportunities. The male in this image was flying upwards from one branch to another, turning his masked head to the side and just showing us a glimpse of his yellow-tipped tail feathers, which looked dipped in paint. The apparent absence of vocal signaling between the birds puzzled me until I pulled up the cedar waxwing sonogram. The high-pitched sound that these birds emit is centered at about 7,000 to 8,000 hertz, compared, for example, to the robin, who clocks in at about 4,000 hertz. Even on the recordings, these songs were faint for me. Remorsefully, I realized that too many hours in the pilot seat of an airplane and on the end of a chainsaw have destroyed those hair cells in my cochlea, which respond to these high frequencies. And I'm going to give you a chance to hear it too. Here it is. There's going to be no questions as to who hears it and who doesn't. It's out there at 8,000 hertz. Well, let's move towards a conclusion now. I want to tell you that, of course, as one travels around looking for birds, one meets other wonderful things, such as this waterhole at night with rhino and giraffes, such as these elephant seals, and that's not father and daughter, that's male and female. The sexual dimorphism in these elephant seals is absolutely massive. And of course, there's a chance to be out at night. This is the Wizard's Hat in Southern Oregon, where the tufted puffins can be seen in season. I want to finish by talking about looking at these birds through another lens, and that is through the lens of their vulnerability. As you well know, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the ICUN, rates every single organism on the planet, bird, animal, plant, with one of these badges, from least concern to extinct. And the Three categories that I'm going to be concentrating on are the vulnerable, the endangered, and the critically endangered. Of the birds I've shown you, this striated caracara is near threatened, and there are a maximum of 2,499 of these birds alive in the world today. The magnificent Steller sea eagle that I photographed in Hokkaido there are 3,600 to 3,800 adults alive, and their numbers are decreasing. The marvelous spatchetail that I mentioned to you from Huembo, Peru, is endangered. Its numbers are less than 1,000 and decreasing. The magnificent red-crowned crane, there are only 1,830 adults, and their numbers are decreasing. The wandering albatross is vulnerable with 20,800 birds known to be alive, decreasing. And so in the epilogue to the book, I talk about the state of birds in the US and the state of birds in the world. And I want to just read you, in finishing, a few notes from that epilogue. I talk about the seminal work of Rachel Carson in her book Silent Spring, and then say that unfortunately, attention to and action on Rachel Carson's message of anthropogenic damage withered over time. And it experienced a powerful renewal 60 years later when a group of biologists from the University of California posed the question, has the Earth's sixth extinction already arrived? They came to the conclusion, amplified in a book by Elizabeth Colbert, who won the Pulitzer Prize, that the sixth extinction is indeed underway. She identified humans as the apex predator, responsible for initiating an extinction event that will rival climate and previous externally mediated catastrophes. In 2017, another distinguished group of biologists, including Stanford University's Paul Ehrlich, reminded us that focusing on extinction of individual species can obscure the greater truth that there is a widespread loss of biomass in progress. A coalition of biologists in the United States and Canada reported in 2019 that there are now 3 billion, with a B, fewer birds in North America than there were only 50 years ago. And to bring the story of global decline home, in the book, I've included the conservation status of every bird in every story. And there are a total of 24 species that are at least vulnerable, 6 threatened, endangered, or critically endangered. Among the birds whose status is known, the birds in the book, 44% of these birds are in decline. And so I finished the book with the hope that while we're waiting impatiently for a new generation to usher in a more friendly, nature-friendly epoch, photographers can help accelerate awareness, because we travel to places that most people only know from magazines or nature documentaries, and we can bring back images that awaken consciousness. We visit the great reserves of avian biomass, such as the Pantanal in Brazil, the Amazonian regions of Peru, that are most threatened by deforestation and climate-induced wildfires. And it's my hope that by capturing and sharing the ethereal beauty of flight, I may nudge some readers to take a more combative and evangelical stance on turning back the tide of the sixth extinction. So to the future, I am now shooting with Sony Alpha 1. It is the most amazing camera I have ever owned or could even imagine owning. It has artificial intelligence that finds the bird's eye in the frame. Once it's found the bird's eye, it then tracks the eye across the frame. Honestly, I think it's cheating. When I take these pictures, I look at them and I shake my head and I think, how on earth did it do that? And you see this king vulture here, and look at the sharpness of its eye. And that is what a camera like the Sony Alpha 1 will do. Here's an example of taken with that camera of a male resplendent quetzal bringing an avocado to the nest. And each one of these images were taken individually and then composited together. Every one of them is tack sharp. So this is my present rig. In answer to the question, do I shoot on a tripod? Yes, this is exactly how I shoot now. This is the 600mm lens. This is the Sony Alpha 1. And this was a very distant greater kestrel in Namibia that was shot with this rig. So thanks so much for listening to me tonight. I realize I've gone on a little bit and hope I haven't bored you, and I hope some of you are still out there, and I'd be very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, Peter, there's still 74 of us on, so apparently you haven't lost many.
Okay.
Peter, those were really interesting. Over how much time did you, when did you start this project of this book, and how long did it take you?
So this was really a slightly pre-pandemic and pandemic project. So I've got another book that's sort of on the back burner, a more technical book on bird flight. And I wasn't finding publishers dashing to publish that. And so I decided, what can I do from the repository of images that I have from these trips that I've done, these things that I collected. And I wrote a sample 3 chapters, which I circulated to publishers in the early part of 2019. And I kept working on it, despite the fact that I didn't have a publisher at the time. And then right in the middle of the pandemic, in May of 2000, one of the publishers, Firefly, wrote me back and said, "Is this title still available?" And I said, "Yeah, let's talk about it." So we did talk about it. And from that moment, I had actually finished the book, completely finished the book. And I'd had a local first reader who was both a literate and birdie. And she was an ideal reader for me. And so when I submitted the manuscript in July of 2000, publication closed, and that last image that you saw of the king vulture was an image I took on my last pre-pandemic trip. I was in Costa Rica in February of 2000, before there was a single case of COVID-19 in South America. And that picture, I liked it so much that I said to my editor, "I really want this picture in the book." And it was ready to go to bed. And he said, "Okay, but this is the last change we're making." And so from March, it's been in production. And of course, this is a terrible time to publish a book. Bookstores are, as everyone else, have been greatly stressed during the pandemic. The supply chains for publishers are no better than supply chains for everybody else. And it's been a constant delay, but finally it's out, and I was thrilled to see it on the shelves at Eagle Harbor Bookstore in Bainbridge Island last Sunday.
Oh, good.
So that's kind of the story of how the production went.
Peter, we have quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go through a few of them.
Sure.
The first one is, how do you organize such a large volume of photographs so that you can find specific pictures?
Yes, that's a great question. So I'll talk first about the hardware and then the software. So on the hardware, I have 2 very large drives. I have a 20 terabyte drive and a 28 terabyte drive. And those are multiply backed up. They're too big to back up in the cloud. Now, I might add that the reason I have so many images is because I always shoot in continuous mode. So when I have an encounter with a bird, and I call an encounter where a single event where, let's say, the bird lands or the bird flies or 2 birds interact, from a single encounter, I typically have 50 to 100 pictures. With the Sony, I am shooting at 30 frames a second. So, I only have to keep my shutter release down for 3 seconds and I've got 100 pictures. So all my photographs are in a single Lightroom catalog, just one catalog. Lightroom is incredible. I had no idea that you could have 650,000 pictures in a Lightroom catalog. And I try to be very careful about indexing. So right now I am just finishing my Namibia trip and I'm going through every shooting day, choosing the pictures that I think are keepers and then indexing them. So then I am able to find them by the tag in their species, in the species tag. If I don't do that, all is lost. And so I have to be completely organized about, first of all, backing up the hard drives, because as they say, it's not if you're going to have a hard drive crash, it's when you're going to have a hard drive crash. And I have to be completely fastidious about indexing in Lightroom. Lightroom is an amazing program. I just hope they never leave Lightroom Classic behind, because everything is moving to the web, and Lightroom now has a version you can do editing on your iPhone. But I am so committed to Lightroom Classic that I think I would break down in tears if they discontinued Lightroom Classic.
Thank you. Does your study of motion help you anticipate the best shots?
Oh, very much so, except birds are very different from humans. I wish I had, I spend a lot of time waiting for birds to fly, hours waiting for birds to fly. And I wish I had all the stories about all the cues. There are some, the most classic one, the one I showed you, the lappet-faced vulture, where he was perching and then he was flying. That bird telegraphed its takeoff the way I wish every bird would telegraph. It started to flap its wings. It did a very deep, what's called a counter movement, bending down, and then it exploded off the branch over a period of about 4 seconds. Most birds don't do that. They do tend to defecate before they leave, but then that isn't a firm indicator either. It's probably only a 10 or 20% certain indicator. So, but yes, it's mostly afterwards. With composition, people ask about composition in flight shots. Most of the composition in flight shots is done on the computer, because it's not like a portrait where you can really spend time composing the shot. You can move to a good location, get a good background, and so on. Sometimes you can, as I showed you in the crane shot. But most of the time you take the opportunistic shot that you can and you work on composition in post-processing.
Thank you. We have a question about the camera setting that you use for your kingfisher shot, particularly the aperture.
Yes. So in the book, I have got all of the settings, and I'll just turn to that page now. I should say that in general, you have seen that my style is basically to isolate a single bird against its habitat. I generally don't take a lot of shots where there are multiple birds. And so I have the luxury of being able to shoot with a wide open aperture, because I'm not looking for a big depth of field most of the time. When I am, I have to sacrifice shutter speed. And because flight is my major interest, I don't like sacrificing shutter speed. And so I generally shoot wide open. And in fact, the kingfisher shot was, it was taken with the 1DX and the 500mm lens. It was taken at a speed of 1/3200th of a second at f4 with an ISO of 1600. That's the other thing about the Sony camera that I can do. I can very comfortably shoot at 5000 ISO. Now that opens new doors for me. I could never shoot above about 2000 ISO. Now, of course, software has got better too. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Topaz suite of programs, Topaz Denoise AI. and Topaz gigapixel AI. The advances in smoothing have been really phenomenal. And so in particular, I can in a push shoot at 10,000 ISO, and I can get rid of that ISO noise in Topaz Denoise AI afterwards. And I could never do that before. And so, when you're shooting at 10,000 ISO, you can have a larger aperture, a smaller aperture, larger number, smaller aperture, and preserve the speed to get the flight shot.
Thank you. Our next question is, how did you choose the photo for your cover?
Yes, I did not. The publisher is the one who, that's where the art of publishing comes in. The publisher believes they know what's going to make somebody, and of course they still think about bricks and mortar. If somebody sees a book in a bookstore, what's going to make them pick it up? And they have things like blue doesn't work. They definitely don't like blue. And since I heard that, I started looking at some nature books, and they're right. There's no blue in there. I don't know why that is, but in wildlife publishing, blue is not a favorite color. So that was a publishing decision.
Thank you. And another question from Candy was, what new insights have you developed about the aerodynamics of flight from this study?
Well, Candy, I have discovered that there is a vast literature on bird aerodynamics, which I have dipped into. I actually gave a Zoom lecture earlier in the year to the US Museum of Mathematics on the mathematics of bird flight. I called it Avian Arithmetic. And that was a very nerdy lecture. It's a lecture very few of you would want to have been at. But the point I'm getting at here is that there is a huge theoretical underpinning to bird flight from smart people who have studied bird aerodynamics, but there is still a tremendous amount that is not known about how birds fly. Despite the fact that aeronautical engineers have copied a number of aspects of bird flight for aircraft, the most common interest at the present time is trying to take features of bird flight into drones that are used, for military and industrial reasons. And so there are many, many what's called biomimetic features in drones, features that are copying those that are seen in birds. And so I definitely cannot claim to have found new insights, but I can claim to have studied what's known quite in detail, and I am awed by it. It's quite stunning that what has been done. For example, one of the most advanced techniques in engineering is computational fluid dynamics. It's a bit like finite element modeling for fluids. And the hovering of hummingbirds has been modeled in computational fluid dynamics. And what looks like to us when we watch a hummingbird hover, what looks like this simple, beautiful, reciprocal motion is this horribly complex aerodynamic event with turbulence and eddies and trailing vortices. And it's really quite astonishing once you lift the cover and see what lies underneath, lift the hood.
A couple more questions here. Do you shoot in RAW usually?
Yes, I always shoot in RAW. And that also compounds my storage problem. Every time I have one image, that's 50 megabytes for me, because I've got 8,500 by 5,500 pixels, which works out to 50 megapixels. And I shoot RAW. I would never shoot JPEGs. That's because I make mistakes. I make mistakes with my exposure. Occasionally I saturate the whites. Occasionally I saturate the blacks. Now, I do less of that now because I'm not using a single through the lens reflex camera. I'm using a mirrorless camera. And with a mirrorless camera, you see what's going to be on your sensor. You're actually seeing the same thing that's recorded on your sensor. You know, when you're using a regular single lens reflex camera, you see a nice picture through the lens, but what's recorded on your card is nothing to do with the picture you're seeing. When you have a mirrorless camera, what's going onto the card is what you are seeing. And so you can do things like putting zebra lines into your viewfinder to warn you you're close to saturating the whites or close to losing the blacks. And it's only in a raw image that you can rescue those mistakes and do a whole lot more. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to shoot raw. I've just finished working on a calendar. I do a calendar with some friends of mine in the Isle of Man. And this year we've done butterflies, and they took the pictures and they were all JPEGs. And I really couldn't do the kind of magic with them to bring them out that you can do in RAW. So yeah, RAW is the way to go.
And then would you give an example of an index composition that you use?
In Lightroom?
I'll have to ask Carol, would you unmute yourself and ask your question? Carol
Oops.
Russo.
Yes, in Lightroom, if you've got, the problem I'm having is I shoot all these pictures,
Yeah.
and then I think about one that I want to, you know, post-process in Lightroom,
Yes.
and trying to find it is a little challenge. So I'm
Yeah.
usually putting down the name of the bird, the location, and the date, but that's not very satisfying. I don't
Yeah.
think that's sufficient.
Carol, let me just pull my Lightroom catalog up and I'll show you. So let me go again and share my screen. Let's see here. See. All right, so here's my screen share. And I will use the screen and close this down. And just before, do you see my screen now? Have you got my
Yes, I can see it. Yes.
Okay, so just before the talk tonight, I mentioned to you that I'm going through my Namibia pictures. Here's a wonderful bird, a secretary bird. So I'm in the develop module now. I'm going to hit G on the keyboard and go into the library module. And over here in the corner, I've got a folder. This is a subcatalog. I'll be merging this with my big catalog soon. But here you see I have a folder called Species. You can't see it very well, but
I can
but
see
I have
it.
a folder called
Fine.
Yeah. And within there, for example, I have got I've got common ostrich there, right? So
Right.
it tells me that I have 14 pictures of a common ostrich anywhere on my disk that are connected, and I click that, and there they are. So I somehow I've thought I had a little thought that was an ostrich, but but you can see the benefit of having carefully indexed as I've gone along. These were different encounters with an ostrich, and they've allowed me to do that. So if I wanted to look, for example, at
So
greater
how do you
flamingo,
connect? So how do you put something in a subfolder? Because it could be anywhere.
yeah, great. So let's go to a single day. Let's go to a day that I haven't actually cataloged right now. So in one of my drives here, I still have to, there we go. I still have to, oh, this looks like a bee catcher. So, and I don't have that. So that is a swallowtail bee catcher. So look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over. This is a folder called Species. And you saw that one before.
Right.
And so what I'm going to do there is I right click on Species, which is a folder, and I say, create a keyword tag inside Species.
Okay.
And there it is. And I'm going to put swallowtail bee eater.
Okay,
And then it'll say, it'll create that. And it has given that photograph that tag.
okay,
So if I now go away from this, go anywhere else in my catalog, there's some stars that I was shooting at night, or let's get there's a giraffe, for example. And so if I now go down inside that species folder and I say, I want to see all of the swallowtail bee eaters that I have got, and there it is.
okay.
So-
Thank you for taking the time to do that. That, well, helps me a lot.
Okay, you're most welcome.
And Peter, you have a lot of people thanking you for your presentation in our chat and thanking you for putting your settings in with the photographs in your book. A couple people have said they've already ordered the book and are very excited to get it.
Oh, excellent.
And people really appreciated the music with some of your videos.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I
Well,
love
so-
music myself, and I just think it so complements the motion in the videos.
Well, thank you. I think, there's one other question about when you're traveling and carbon footprints and trying to offset that.
You know, it's becoming more of a guilty pleasure, I have to say. And particularly at this time when the climate conference is going on in Glasgow, we cannot help feel that there are a small group of people that are contributing more than their share to global pollution. And I have to say that I am one of them. And I am one of them. Global pollution. And I have to say that I am one of them. And I am one of them. So it is weighing on my mind.
If I might just, this is Sarah, the question was,
It is weighing on my mind.
have you tried to find carbon offset? The question was actually whether you've tried to do carbon offset and if you have anything to recommend or any.
To date, I have not,
Organization.
but I would love to hear from any of you who have successfully done that.
Thank you. Well, Peter,
Thank you.
this has been a wonderful presentation. And I think maybe people. Wonderful presentation. And I think maybe. I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. I don't know where it's coming from. So I'm hearing an echo. I don't know where it's. So maybe I can ask David, the host, to take over.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. So yeah, Peter, we just feel really grateful to have had this opportunity with you. We're glad we caught you before you headed to Alaska. So thank you for making room in your schedule. And I certainly hope this boosts the sales of your book, because I already ordered a copy for my daughter. So thank
Well, that's
you.
kind of you.
Safe travels, and please keep producing your photographs.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to be with you tonight.
And
And
if
everybody
maybe-
who joined us, thank you very much.
Maybe if people could come off mute and give some applause.
Thank you, Peter.
Applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was
Good night.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.